ou noite? Exatas ou humanas? Cidade ou campo? Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o Sebrae acredita que empreender é uma porta para a independência, que está aberta para as pessoas de todas as idades, gêneros e que buscam mais opções para suas vidas. Para o Sebrae, tão importante quanto incentivar negócios a darem certo é apoiar pessoas que transformam sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
A moda da Malve não tem ponto final, igual a sua. Nós acreditamos que pequenas atitudes transformam o mundo. Quer mais atitude do que mudar o seu jeito de escolher? Moda inteligente, feita de um jeito mais sustentável que reflete o seu estilo. Uma peça de roupa pode viver muitas histórias, por muito tempo. Não é sobre ser descartável. É sobre você e sobre o mundo. Malve, moda sem ponto final.
I am Carol Perlinger, co-founder of Rio Ethical Fashion. I hope you're enjoying our forum so far. Thank you for joining us this evening for this incredibly interesting and important panel discussion, A Planet Full of Clothes, the Kantamanto market, located in Ghana. I am personally very excited to learn about the work the OR Foundation and Board Fashion Ghana developed with the aim of reconciling the circular economy and social justice. So welcome, Liz Rickets, designer and co-founder of the OR Foundation. Welcome, Yvonne and Ntiamoah, president and founder of the Board Fashion Ghana. And welcome, Patrick Duffy, the founder of Global Fashion Exchange and SwapChain. For those who don't know, Patrick is also a Rio Ethical Fashion ambassador and has been with us since our very first edition. Very happy to have you all with us today. And Patrick will be moderating this panel discussion tonight. So the floor is all yours, Patrick.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's incredible to be back with you at Rio Ethical Fashion, Carol, and everybody here. And I'm so proud of the wonderful growth and all of the exciting things that you've accomplished in the past 3 years. It's been an incredible day of discussions, and from thinking outside the box to investment into new business models for the fashion industry and more. With that said, I'm also very excited with our next guests, who are the true forces of fashion in the fashion industry. They both have a specific focus on Accra, Ghana, home to the Kantamanto market, which is the second largest secondhand clothing market in West Africa. It's a hub for creativity, a hub for upcycling, sustainability, culture, maybe a little swapping, and more. With that said, while there are beautiful talents in that marketplace, there's also an uncontrollable systemic issue that centers around a social and environmental disaster, spurred by the fashion industry's lack of transparency and adhering to responsible business practices. On tonight's discussion, A Planet Full of Clothes, we're going to dive into the beauty and the challenges surrounding the Kantamanto market and the people who power it, looking at the impact of the fashion industry and how we can work together to address the seemingly overwhelming atrocities that plague the once beautiful and thriving ecosystem. It's also my pleasure to welcome Yvonne and Ntiamoah, president and founder of the Board of Fashion in Ghana, and Liz Rickets of the OR Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you both?
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah. Good morning and good evening to, or good afternoon and good evening. What time is it where you're at, Yvonne?
So it's just 11:15.
We promise
in the evening.
We promise we won't keep you out too late, but thank you so much for staying up for us.
Very welcome.
And Liz, you're in New York. You're in Central New York, right?
Yes, I am in Central New York. It's 6:45.
And you'll be heading to Ghana tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. And for those of you who don't know these two beautiful beings, it'd be great if we could start with a little bit of background on you both. And maybe, Yvonne, we start with you, since you are Ghanaian and from Accra. Maybe you can give us a little bit of background on how you got to where you're at in the fashion industry.
Okay, so I worked in industry for many years, so about 20 years. And then I went into fashion education. My first encounter of fashion education in Ghana was supporting the first fashion degree program at Radford University, and moving on to where I am now, supporting the first creative fashion institute in Africa, which hopefully will open in the next academic year, which is September. The Board of Fashion was set up really to support the designers coming out of these new programs that have been established in Ghana, and to help them map their way through an industry that it's not founded as it is in the West, and to help them and support them gain materials and textiles in order to realize their creations. And that's how we came across Kantamanto and the issue of Kantamanto. So for us, Kantamanto is like a double-edged sword, if you like. And that's basically my background, and basically my big issue fight, if you like, support in terms of the Board of Fashion. Yeah.
Well, boiling it down into a few sentences is pretty incredible, because I know you have such a vast wealth of knowledge, career, and experience that I can't wait to dive into. So thank you for editing a little bit, but we'll dive in a little bit more. Liz, how about you? Can you share a little bit about your background and how you arrived to be so passionate about the Kantamanto market?
Sure. Thank you so much, Patrick. So I have a somewhat similar story. I studied design and worked in the industry for a little while, essentially saw the waste on that side and started asking a lot of questions about it, started offering up my services to anyone who was claiming to try to solve these issues in the fashion industry. And one of those companies is a fair trade fashion company that was based in Ghana. And that was my entry point into Ghana a little over 10 years ago. And through that, I immediately started upcycling clothing from Kantamanto. But also through that process, I think once you confront the excess that is in Kantamanto, and I think a lot of emerging designers in Ghana have the same sort of battle, is once you confront the sheer quantity of clothing, it's very difficult to justify making more clothing. And so essentially we shifted from having a fair trade fashion brand that was working on upcycling to strictly education programs. So we were connecting students in the US with students in Ghana and then also in South Africa through an object-based pen pal program. And this is where Kantamanto became even more important, because our students in the US, they would grow out of their clothes, donate them. They didn't really know where they would end up. And our students in Ghana would be wearing clothing from the secondhand clothing trade and from Kantamanto specifically. And so we were going to learn more about it, and essentially over time realized that what was being said in the global north about the secondhand clothing trade did not match up at all with the reality on the ground in Kantamanto. And that's why we decided to focus so much on this and work in solidarity with the community there.
And is that where your research project came from, the Dead White Man's Clothes? Is that where that came
from?
Okay.
Yes, Dead White Man's Clothes. Yeah, so Dead White Man's Clothes, we launched in 2016. And again, that very much grew out of basically two things. One was that in working with our students, we understood, or we had come to understand, that the secondhand clothing trade is a supply chain. So a lot of people think of it just as secondhand, but it's actually the primary supply chain for over half of the planet. And so because we were very involved in the sustainable fashion space, we were wondering, why aren't we asking the same questions that so many people are asking about the, firsthand supply chain of the secondhand supply chain? What are the power dynamics? Who's making money? What does the labor look like? And so we wanted to ask those questions. And then also, again, we saw that in the global north, with the increasing conversation around circularity, there was this tendency to position the secondhand clothing trade as inherently positive and not really ask any questions outside of that, or really go to the markets themselves to try to understand. And that's why we launched the project. And I can go into more of the findings if you want.
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit later in the conversation. Yes, we can't wait to explore that with you and share more. Yvonne, I'd like to know more about what your education is like with the students and what's the culture around fashion there with you?
I think, the education is fashion BA honors. And like I said, the industry is not as established as it is in the West for fashion designers. So when they come out, there is a real battle as in what part of the industry they go to, how they establish their brands and so on. And in terms of Kantamanto, like I said earlier, it's like a double-edged sword because the textiles, the formal textiles industry is the printed textiles, the African print as we know it. And then the Obronuwewu, which is the local name, which is the dead white man's clothes, as Liz has translated into her research, adds like a double-edged sword. Within Kantamanto, you have a lot of factory ends as well, which gives the students access to fabrics they may otherwise not have had because they can't afford to order the minimum quantities that these fabric companies will expect them to order. So Kantamanto gives them access to lots of different types of weights of textures of fabrics that they wouldn't otherwise get with the printed local fabrics that we have.
And what drives the students there? Like, what are they looking? How do they create their designs, and what drives them for their design? Like, what is it that inspires them to create?
As a designer myself, people always ask, don't I miss designing? Don't I want to go back into designing? When you encounter the creativity of these students and you can help them realize their collections and whatever it is that's happening in their heads is the most fulfilling, rewarding, amazing thing. Because quite often, some of the things that they can imagine or they can foresee people wearing is beyond what we imagine African designers to be doing. And I always push my students to step out of their box, if you like, because I think quite often, and I was a student in the West, will be doing. And quite often it's very different because they mix all the cultures due to the internet and that the world being such a small place now. We are all connected and they are also feeding on all the same information we're feeding on. So their influences are very global and yet they're mixing their culture and their texture and their color. And it's vibrant, it's very exciting. It's a very exciting environment to be in. Yeah.
Liz, how about you? I know you work with so many different artisans and creators and designers and youth there. Can you share a little bit about what you see through their eyes or what's inspiring to you from them, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, what Yvonne said really resonates in the sense that what we hear so much is that there's this tension, specifically talking about Kantamanto, where Kantamanto is the source of material and also sometimes can be a source of inspiration, but also it is direct competition, not only in the sense of, it's flooding the market and oversaturating it basically, but it's also shifting mindsets of consumers and of citizens in Ghana around what fashion is or what trends exist and also what a garment should cost, right? Because Kantamanto, the clothing there, is $1 or less for most items. And so it's almost, it's impossible for an emerging designer to compete with that, which means that they have to really design for a very specific market and often sell not only within Ghana, but outside of Ghana to survive. And I think that tension is something that all of us should really honor and pay more attention to and support them through that because they are really being hit, I think, on all sides. And then also the psychological component that I talked about before of just if you confront all of this clothing and you can see this waste in your country, in your backyard, it's difficult to justify making more garments, or there's that sort of cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah. Can you, before, I'd like to get to pre-fast fashion destruction on the Kantamanto market, if I can even say it that way. It's a beautiful system of people. It's a beautiful system of so many different retailers and makers and dyers and all these different types of people that exist in the fashion industry. Can you both give us some context about how that ecosystem worked before this kind of destructive system got applied to it? It's a massive 30,000 people. Am I correct with that number?
Yeah.
30,000 traders.
30,000 traders. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know if Yvonne wants to go and share first.
Yeah.
I think historically, Ghanaians are very much into recycling, upcycling. If I remember, my grandmother and my mother both have cloths from maybe when I was born. They don't throw things away. Mm-hmm. And it's kept and passed down. I remember when my great grandmother died, I was given some of the fabric that she wore and owned, and I'm expected to keep it and pass it down to my children. You just don't throw things away, down to Coca-Cola bottle tops. I'm sure Liz knows that one of our designers, he uses the Coca-Cola bottle tops, the beer can bottle tops, and uses it as embellishments on a jacket. We don't throw anything away, but yet landed on our doorstep is this huge waste or a problem from other countries that we now have to evolve into our ecosystem and evolve into our way of life and upcycle, recycle, anything but put into landmines or landfills or in the sea. So although there is an ecosystem of existence for the Ghanaian communities, now it's been blown out of all proportions because you simply can't do much with a lot of the waste from Kantamanto.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was, kind of getting at before, is that this was a thriving and beautiful ecosystem for many, many years before it was interrupted, I guess you could safely say, an unwelcomed interruption. And now I guess that's where the catastrophe starts, and this conversation really starts as well about a world full of clothes, a world full of excess, a world full of too much, and a beautiful ecosystem being interrupted by a world that it had actually nothing to do with. So maybe what we can do, Liz, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I do think it's important to note that while Kantamanto has an upcycling culture and there's this indigenous sustainability logic that is incredible and should be honored, we also have to acknowledge that it wasn't necessarily anything that Ghanaians ever asked for, right? Like the origin of the name Dead White Man's Clothes in Wawu comes from the fact that when so much of the clothing started coming into Ghana, people assumed that it was the clothing of dead foreigners because the concept of having so much excess was foreign. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very profound. And also it's important that folks recognize that the roots of this are in colonialism, right? I mean, under colonial rule, Ghanaians were expected to conform to professional dress codes as defined by the British, and that is what led to this trade in the first place. So I think that Kantamanto very much has become a model of what the global North recognizes as sustainability, but that's because of the culture. And I think that because there's so much excess, today it's 15 million garments coming through the market every single week. It's more than any retail environment could possibly deal with. But people in the market also, they don't want that much excess. When I was there just a month and a half ago, we were talking to one of our friends who's a retailer, and she was we're asking, do you have anything you would like to say to people who sent this clothing or to people who made the clothing? And she said, oh, I would like to tell them that we are not like them. Here in Ghana, we wear things for a very long time. Like, we don't just get rid of our stuff. And if we've asked there's over 5,000, registered retailers in Kantamanto, and all of them would say that they would rather have less stuff of higher quality.
Yeah.
And so, the oversupply is not something that anyone has asked for or that is welcome, and it very much is destroying that beautiful ecosystem, as you said.
Everything. And so I guess now would be a really good time to show a video that I think Liz supplied to us, because before we show the video, it's absolutely mind-blowing. I think when you talk to people about this issue there, people can't even picture it. So I think this video will help kind of contextualize everything, just to show us about what actually is really happening. So maybe we can show the video. Wow. So beautiful and powerful and irking at the same time. So maybe we now shift to how this oversaturation and excess has affected the ecosystem, the people, and the planet. Liz, maybe you can share a little bit about your firsthand experience about what's happened there as a result of this.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to point out in the video, you can see that upcycling culture, right? It's people dyeing, mending, washing, ironing, everything. Mm-hmm. So again, 15 million garments coming through this market every single week. And what we found through our research is that 40% leave as waste. And that waste is handled in two ways. So it's handled formally and informally. And so formally just means by the government. And the AMA, the local waste management system, was taking 70 tons of clothing waste from Kantamanto to a landfill every single day. But that landfill actually caught on fire and exploded due to the oversaturation of the clothing waste, which I won't go into, but we have another video with the head of the waste management department who explains the science behind all of that. And so there is no landfill for the clothing to go to. And so a lot of the clothing ends up just being sort of swept into the gutter system, where it eventually makes its way out to sea. And through that process, it also kind of clogs the gutter system, leads to flooding, which increases, the risk of cholera and malaria. And then when it makes its way to sea, we're talking about millions of garments going into the ocean. And by then they've wrapped around themselves, we call them tentacles. They wrap around themselves, they bring in a bunch of plastic and metal. They become these very dangerous, animated objects that are moving out and in with the tide. And they can be, 8 feet to 30 feet long and like a foot thick. They're massive. And so not only are they destroying the marine ecosystem, but they're also making life harder for local fishermen. We talked to fishermen who, have capsized because these tentacles pull down their nets. Also, it wraps around their motors, which means they have to go out further. And this is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world already. So the fact that they have to go out further only makes their job more dangerous, let alone the fact that it's basically destroyed the marine ecosystem, so there are no fish close to shore. And then again, there's no real way to manage that. So even if the waste gets pulled out of the ocean, it just gets burned. And then a lot of the waste also is dumped in informal settlements. We work most closely in Old Fatima, where over 80,000 people live. We work with the waste pickers there, and also a lot of people who work in Kantamanto live there. And again, the impact, there's of course the environmental impact. You have a dump that's 30 feet tall, over 60% clothing waste. A lot of it is being burned. It's where cattle graze, children play here. It's very detrimental from a public health and environmental perspective. But then also what's perhaps even more important is to recognize that waste is then used to further disenfranchise people who are living in poverty, because it's used to blame them for the waste when they're not responsible for it at all. Rather, they have to survive it, right? And this is used politically to, again, sometimes bulldoze their homes and paint this narrative of the fact that they're the ones causing the waste. And then also socially, in the marketplace, this oversupply of goods means that more and more retailers are going into debt. So we found in our research that less than 20% of retailers actually make a profit off of the average bale. And so more and more of them are taking out loans, and that's putting them basically in a debt cycle, which is part of what perpetuates the waste. Because if you are indebted to the system that is exploiting you, you have to keep betting on the next bale, right? So retailers have less money and less time to invest in rehabilitating the lower quality things that we from the global north send there. And it means that they have to just keep buying more and more bales, which again leads to more waste coming out of the system.
Not only that, but the literally backbreaking work that happens.
The Kaye, we work directly with Kaye. Kaye it means she who carries the burden. They're female headquarters, and they transport the bales from the importers to the retailers and then also throughout the market. Essentially, Kantamanto would not run without their labor. And, most of them, they can be as young as 8. Typically in Kantamanto, they're 14 to 30 years old. And most of them are migrating from the northern part of Ghana because of increased desertification. And I think it's important to stop and pause on how absurd it is that you have such a massive population migrating from farms because they can't feed themselves. And this is an absurd sort of truth and injustice that's happening all over the world. And so they're coming to Accra in search of, a job where they can make some money to send back to their family a lot of times. And when they carry these bales on their heads, they're 120 to 200 pounds, which is their whole body weight or more. And they're paid very little, like 30 cents to $1 per trip. And the bales, as you said, it's backbreaking labor, it's debilitating, and it also can be fatal because their necks break under the weight of the bales.
Yvonne,
Yeah.
how maybe you can share how the clothing gets there. I think in the global north,
Yeah.
we hear a lot about, especially with my experience with swapping and trying to educate people on the end of life of clothing. I think people think they're being responsible by bringing things to a secondhand store or a place like Goodwill or Salvation Army or a textile recycler. Maybe you can share a little bit about how the clothing gets there and some of the issues. And of course, Liz, please jump in as well. But Yvonne, maybe you could share a little bit about how it gets there.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I always led to believe that taking your your clothes that you don't want anymore to Salvation Army, the Cancer Research, Oxfam, all of those secondhand clothing stores. I thought I was doing a good thing. And I believe that right up until I came to Ghana and saw Kantamanto and saw all the wastage and all the harm that it actually does. So, I mean, all the secondhand clothes that we see in the charity stores may be as little as 40% if we're lucky.
Oh, I think we maybe. Are you there, Yvonne? She froze.
Yvonne?
Yvonne, are you there?
Oh no.
Liz, maybe you can.
Sure, I can. Yeah, so.
Jesus. Yes.
Yeah, so when we donate clothes in the global north, again, a lot of us think that we're doing the right thing, but essentially because there's just too much clothing, the charities and the clothing collectors in the global north, they can only sell 10 to 20% of what they collect in country. And then the rest of it either gets downcycled into rags or into insulation, but the majority of it gets put into the global secondhand trade and exported to places like Kantamanto. And I do think, there's all sorts of reasons why people donate their clothes. I do think people most of the time do have the best intentions, but we also have to recognize that if you're always donating to secondhand, but you're never buying secondhand. So if you're always donating the old, but buying the new, and if you're always putting in the system and never taking out of the system, then of course, this is where we have the issue. And I think there's a lot of cognitive bias, and again, a lot of myths that have been fed by the industry too, of oversimplifying it for people. But when we've, in doing our research, we've looked back at the Ghana archives, we've seen the communication from the time that this trade really kicked off in Ghana. And it was very clear from the beginning that this was always a business. It was never about providing free clothing to people who expressed need. It was always about we need an outlet for Americans and for Europeans. We need an outlet for their stuff so that Americans and Europeans will keep buying more stuff. That was the reason that the secondhand clothing trade was born.
So how then, with all of the input and no solution for the output, and it landing in Accra and many other places all over the world, doesn't really seem like there's a solution in place. So where do we even begin to address that? Is it with legislation?
I think we have to address it on all ends. So I think hopefully what this conversation does for people and what our collective efforts do for people and what Kantamanto makes visible is that there's no market anywhere in the world that's capable of absorbing the excess that the fashion industry is currently producing. Mm-hmm. And so this should be a point of no return for all of us to recognize that there's not some magical way. We can't recycle our way out of this problem. Like we need to come up with solutions for right now, wherever we are. And I think that looks like a lot of different things. So for us in Ghana, we're specifically looking at how do we build out recycling and decomposition pathways locally that can handle some of this waste while also taking people out of debt, so that we're, again, tackling the roots of this issue. And then also looking at legislation, as you said, both in Ghana and abroad. And something that we're very focused on is EPR policies, extended producer responsibility policies, which are being considered by countries all over the world and states in the United States. And this is essentially, a tax on goods. And that money is supposed to go to manage the goods at the end of life, the clothing at the end of life. And what we're pushing for is, as these policies are developed in the global north, they need to include ecological reparations, or they need to include some sort of pathway for that money to travel with the clothing. Because what's happening right now is the only EPR policy for textiles is in France, and it's been in place since 2007. And while they have done a good job of collecting more textiles and keeping it out of their landfills, they've still actually exported 40% of what they collected to the continent of Africa, and none of the money that has been collected through the EPR scheme has gone with it. And so again, we continue to have this power imbalance and expect people in communities like Kantamanto to just manage it. And it's not only absurd, it's violent. We have this very clear hypocrisy that's going on that is still rooted in colonialism, where you have the rise of resale in the global north with all these platforms getting, millions of dollars of investment. But meanwhile, Kantamanto actually has far bigger impact in terms of the number of goods that it recirculates. But people there are going into debt, and they're left to deal with the true end of life. And so we need we need a reckoning. We need solidarity between these movements in the global north and the global south. And we're very much pushing for some form of ecological reparations to, again, sort of kickstart a local circular economy in Ghana.
You do so much incredible advocacy and so much incredible work around it. And, I'm really, drawn to the work that you do and also that Yvonne does and helping the Kantamanto market, from best I can from my viewpoint to take those steps forward. But I guess, what about the fashion companies, the mega fashion companies that are really contributing to this problem? Do you find that they are maybe turning their heads the other way? Are they addressing the issue? Are they stepping up?
They're definitely not addressing it fast enough. I think I'm actually somewhat surprised. I mean, I've been humbled in the last year, to be honest, to realize how few people working in the fashion industry and how few CEOs, how few people working in supply chain actually know about the secondhand clothing trade. Most people have no idea. Mm-hmm. And so I do see some glimmer of hope in the sense that more people are becoming aware and they are reaching out and they do seem moved to act. But the structure of the fashion industry and the incentives and the rules of the game, if you will, are not in anyone's favor. Like they're not in Kantamanto's favor, they're not in my favor, and they're certainly not in favor also of people who work within these big fashion companies who care. Because you can poke and poke and poke your way up, but if the incentives are always profit led, and if there aren't policies in place to check that, then it's very difficult for people from within these companies to make change, let alone people like us who are agitating from the outside. And so I think we need, one of the most important things for us is a living wage for garment workers. So we need, the reason our disposability culture is only possible because we've treated people as if they are disposable. And moving towards a living wage, mandating a living wage for garment workers is one way that we can force brands to divest from disposability, because then the true cost will be a part of the garment. And then another part of that is legislating around durability and quality, which I would define quality based off of durability, and basically requiring, not only specific inputs going into materials, so making sure that nothing is being created anymore that can't be recycled or can't be decomposed safely, but that also we are legislating around, again, durability, like how many times can something be washed before it loses its structure. Very simple things like that. So we definitely need those changes. And I think absolutely, no, the industry's not doing enough. That's very clear, I think, to everyone. And I think it's even though I said there is a glimmer of hope because I talked to a lot of people within these companies who do genuinely care, it is very, very disheartening to see what happened over the last year, because we were in a global pandemic and still these brands prioritized profit at the expense of garment workers and everyone in the value chain, to the extent, that they canceled orders, they left garment workers to starve. And the fact that that profit incentive would still be so strong for people during a global pandemic is really scary.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk dollars and cents for a minute. If you can help us put things into context, what would any thoughts on what a cost would be? Like what could $1 million do? What could $100,000 do? What could, what kind of investment do people need to make with money in order to even start this process? Is that something you've thought about before?
That's a good question. I think, we've thought about it on the scale of what needs to happen in Ghana, which, it's the amount of money that's needed to invest in a local, to sort of catalyze, because again, Ghana has the culture, it has the mindset, it has the skills for the circular economy. It just needs some cash investment and some support and some platforming to, again, stop this debt cycle and to build localized, contextualized solutions for recycling and decomposition. And so for that, it's a couple $1 million. It's definitely not the amount of money that, again, is being invested in a lot of what I would call pseudo solutions, because the investment needs to be in people, not in fancy technology, because that's what I've seen in Kantamanto, right, is that circularity isn't about fancy recycling technology. Yes, we need those things because we've made such a mess that we need that now. But real circularity is about remembering why we need one another, remembering the mutuality, because that's what circularity will take. Like circularity will take respecting one another and truly connecting with one another again, because you're literally passing objects and materials from one person to the next or from one entity to the next. And we haven't lived that way in so long.
It's such an unbelievably simple thing to recognize. However, it seems really difficult to get there. And I love how eloquently and beautifully that you put it. And you have so much hope and spirit behind you when you talk about it. I think it's amazing. So I guess I just want to flag to the audience that if there is anybody that knows where to spend the money to help get Kantamanto circular,
yes, please
connect with Liz for sure. So yeah.
And it's important. It's a critical moment, I will say, to invest in Kantamanto, because again, what we were saying earlier in this conversation, the secondhand clothing trade has kind of chipped away at that indigenous sustainability logic, and it has taught citizens that clothing is disposable. Mm-hmm. And so now you have more Ghanaian citizens that are starting to sort of demand fast fashion and starting to, for a very specific example is like recently we met someone who was shopping in Kantamanto who told us that instead of washing their jeans, they just burn them after they're done wearing them, because the clothing in Kantamanto is so cheap that why not? Why not just come back? Like, why take the trouble to wash it? And that's a huge shift in that mentality. And so it's very important that we build out the circular economy before that takes hold.
Yeah. I'm just looking at some of these. I'm so sad we lost Yvonne. I don't know where she is.
I know.
We're going to have to connect with her on another chat. But Yvonne, we miss you.
The electricity maybe went out.
Yes. Oh, well, I'm looking at some of these lovely questions. Some of these questions from the lovely audience members. So I think I'll share some of them. Liz, somebody wants to ask. Hi, Liz. Is there any kind of public policy in Ghana to mitigate the importation, to mitigate the imports? That's a really great question.
So it's illegal to import underwear. That's about the only thing, but underwear and bras still come in. No, there's currently no regulation around the quantity that's coming in or around defining the quality. And defining the quality will always be very, very difficult. But I do think that's, again, part of the work that we're doing with our community is kind of mapping out what would a 10-year plan look like for legislation that would, slowly decrease the quantity that's coming in, while also working with folks in the global north to understand quality and, the true impact of what's going on.
Yvonne, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Liz, Liz,
I know it.
Liz.
You're a saint for doing this so late. Anytime people ask me when I'm in Ghana to do talks at late at night, I'm like, no, there's no way. Because the power and the internet always goes out. Yeah.
Liz, you're about to feel my pain. When I went back to Britain at Easter time, and I literally wanted to hug the internet, and I just, if it's huggable, it's just, it's again is Africa or developing countries receiving really poor quality goods for a lot of money. Mm-hmm. We pay a lot for the internet here, and the service. Sometimes my blood is up here.
Yep.
So upsetting, because you can't perform at the same level. You can't be professional. You can't be at that table.
This is an example.
This is a perfect example. If the basics are not working in your favor, you cannot compete.
Yep.
You just can't. And every day this week, I've had internet interruptions with work every day, and life is online now, so you can't have the basics not performing. It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
It is, and it is. We're super happy that you're back, but actually grateful for this live example, because I think also too here in the West, I'm in Minnesota. I think people think internet is everywhere. It's Starbucks. It's you walk up, so it's like we have this luxury. So I have to say thank you so much for taking a quick break and getting back to us.
It's not just internet, it's electricity too. Yeah. Like when our team does lives or does meetings, they have to charge their phone and their computer for the whole day before, because they know that the electricity might go out, and they'll like purposely not talk on the phone the whole day. So people don't know. So
Yvonne, we have some questions for you. In your absence, we were scheming up some questions.
Sure.
So, when you and I were chatting on the phone the other day, Yvonne and I had a really spirited and wonderful conversation on the phone the other day. I just loved it. And we were talking about solutions. We were talking about legislation specifically. And Yvonne, I asked you at that time when we were getting to know each other a little bit more, like, what are your thoughts on those solutions and some of the legislation? So maybe you can drop some of the legislation bombs on us, some of those ideas on us.
I think it needs to start from the West, where the clothes are coming from in the first place. I've been looking at the Textiles Recycling Association from Britain, and there was an about ID in the UK, and how they need to tighten their legislation and tighten the standards of clothing that's sent to developing countries like Ghana. And I think it would be the same in the US. So it's the US, the UK, and Germany are the biggest exporters of the secondhand clothes globally. So if those three countries did a little bit just to curb that 40% waste, it would be a huge benefit to the traders at Kantamanto who are losing money, because 40%, that's their profit, right? And also to the local economies and to these communities who are having to deal with that waste. And then the second bit of legislation needs to come from Ghana. The standard of clothes that are imported into the country, the standard of the bales that are imported to the country. The thing is, I don't think they don't open the bales at the harbour to see what's inside of the clothes, because they're wrapped so tightly. I'm sure you saw in that video, they're not open until they get to Kantamanto. So it would be hard for an inspector at the harbour in Ghana to see what's there and whether it meets the standard or not. So it's got to be done in Britain, America, or Germany before it leaves the country, so that they can see exactly what's been sent. So I think the European legislation, textiles and garment legislation, it needs to go there, and it needs to go to the Textiles Recycling Association in Britain as well, to have those legislations tightened.
Liz, any thoughts?
I mean, I completely agree, building on the sort of recommendations that I made before. And also we are in touch with the clothing, with PRA and with the exporting associations. I think what's tricky too is that there's different definitions of quality, and that's also a few decades ago, a lot of the importers and retailers from Ghana would actually travel to the global north to advise people on what would sell and to help with that sorting process. And because that no longer happens and there's no longer that kind of reciprocity and communication back and forth, I think that also leads to a lot of these issues. And so it has to be a collaborative effort in terms of defining what quality is and what should be coming into the country in the first place.
From my experience, one of the things that I educate on a lot is about the acts of consumption and how we've kind of been conditioned into this overproduction and overconsumption pattern. And I just wanted to ask a question about, the marketing around these specific types of products for things made with natural materials and decomposable materials and organic materials. Is that really going to solve the problem? Let's just say that everything that was coming into Kantamanto was organic and decomposable, but you still have it still is waste and it still takes time to break down. Is that something that you guys have thought about? Is it, does that make any sense? to me, it doesn't make much sense to keep promoting the sales of all of these natural and organic products. Even though that's great, it's still an issue. It's still something that has to take time to break down and still gets caught, still gets caught in those boat nets and still, suffocates people and all that kind of stuff. So
most of it can't be decomposed anyways. No, I mean, I definitely don't think sort of quote unquote sustainable products, that's not going to solve the problem. We need less clothing, and we frankly don't need more clothing. And that's a hard thing for companies to swallow, these big fashion companies. But, fast fashion is not a human right. Disposability is not a human right. Overconsumption is not a human right. But that's what these companies have convinced people of. They have convinced people that it is your human right to be able to buy whatever you want anytime you want, and that convenience is a human right. Convenience is not a human right. Mm-hmm. So,
can I share?
I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to share something. So when I started swapping a long, long time ago, I started working with a company, and the clothing swap was done in order to help promote textile recycling for a fashion brand. And so I'm guilty. And I just realized that fairly recently, actually, Liz, since I started really following your work about the Kantamanto market, that what I was doing was, I guess, in a way, kind of greenwashing, because I was telling people to bring your clothing back to a textile, bring your clothing back to a store to recycle it through the active clothing swaps, get a ticket to be incentivized to buy more. And going back to your point, Liz, which is really super powerful, about the fact that there's a intake, or there's a direct line of clothing going in to these recyclers.
No one's taking it out.
Yeah, exactly. So I was that guy. I was totally that guy. And I didn't realize that I was telling people that it's okay to just bring your stuff back, recycle it, and then go ahead and buy more. And that was a really, really powerful thing for me to digest. And I think that's something really important for people to really understand, is that simple point alone, that just by bringing your clothing to a secondhand shop or a textile recycler isn't going to really be that helpful. It's about changing a mindset.
Yeah.
I think also individuals need to take ownership for the things that they do take to the secondhand stores. Because it should be something, not something you would never wear again and should be in the bin. It should be something that perhaps it doesn't fit the occasions that you attend anymore, or it doesn't fit you, or something that's almost new, not something that nobody would ever wear. Because why why would you take it to a shop for that to be sold? Because all that happens to it is it's not sold in your community or to your neighbor. It's shipped to the other end of the world and dumped in the sea. So it's, you know, we've got to take personal responsibility and not just be looking at agencies and governments to solve the big issues where we're all guilty.
I love that. And also recognizing through that, again, this like sickness of overconsumption, where we've somehow come to believe that the best way to help our neighbor is to donate a product or to give a you know, if someone is experiencing houselessness in my neighborhood, I'm more likely to donate goods to a charity that says they're going to help that person than I am to talk to that person or connect with that person or really try to understand, you know. And I think, again, that's, everything has become so transactional, and we're just really not connected. And that's why people have these blinders on when they donate things, and they kind of just, you know, assume I'm doing the right thing and move on.
Yeah. I was, Liz, when I was talking to you about this chat on the phone the other day too, I was talking about the culture of waste and the culture of like cleaning things out in your closets and what that's like right now. And I made a funny joke. Well, I thought it was funny about Marie Kondo and how wonderful that is, that she talks about cleaning and, you know, cleaning up your aura through your closet and all that kind of stuff, but there was no solution. And so I think there's no solution to the actually of throwing things out. So I think that's something that we all really need to think about, which is really important and not really talked about. And that connection to people, I think, is also really important about and how we've gotten so transactional, looking to things like apps or looking to things like, things like that technology to kind of save us, but it's actually really right there in front of us, which is that human connection.
Exactly.
So where are we going to go now? How do we slow this down from the experts? How are we going to solve this problem? No pressure.
I mean, I think talks like this help, right? Again, I think it's about people understanding this point of no return, that there really is too much clothing in the world with nowhere good to go. And we have to be able to sit with that discomfort of the fact that there is no market-based solution for this problem. And we need, again, to all the things that we've talked about, we need legislation on the secondhand side. We need to recognize that the secondhand clothing trade is a supply chain. There are labor issues, there are environmental issues. We need to legislate that. But also we need to legislate what's coming in, right? Again, lowering quantities, looking at what materials are being used, a living wage for garment workers, and reparations. I think that, that's our real agenda is ecological reparations, because, and maybe that's scary for people. We talk a lot about how we've, as an organization, there's the traditional 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle, and we use reckoning, recovery, and reparations. And I think that can be scary for people, or it sounds aggressive, but really all we're talking about is healing, right? Like there is, at some point we have to recognize that there is a need for an apology. There is a need to correct wrong. We can't just kind of gloss over it and move on with, again, sort of these recycling technologies and new products, because it's not going to be enough to really heal from what we've done.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. That is so beautiful. Yvonne, what do you think?
I think my big thing is legislation on both sides of the continent. And I think, yes, the Ghanaian government does have an issue that it needs to address, and either it puts pressure on the people who import into the country to make sure that they are sending goods that are of good standard, that can be sold, and are not going into landmines and in the sea. So I think there's work to be done in terms of legislation. Yeah.
So that's beautiful. I like that as well. Love that as well, actually. I'd love to see that. So I'm going to also add one little thing, actually the big thing, which is the investment piece. And Liz, we touched on that a little bit before when you were taking a break from us, Yvonne.
Yeah.
We were talking about the investment into people and how we need to really do that. And I just want to share to the audience that's here with us right now, the investment into people, the investment into education, the investment into empowerment, the investment into disassembling these systems that are destroying people and planet, not only in Kantamanto market, but what happens in the Kantamanto market affects the rest of us all over the world. And in investing into the people in Brazil and Bolivia and Latin America and all those people. So I think investment, for me, the I word is the big one. So if there's anybody watching who has money, who has access to money, these two will know how to spend it.
Yeah.
Call to action. So I want to say,
thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, of course. You know what? Manifest it and ask for what you need. Let's see. Let's get that. I will be I'm an advocate for you both. We've run out of time. And so I just want to say thank you so much to you, two beautiful and incredible goddesses. You've just inspired us all and inspired a world of people. And we're so grateful to be here with you at the Rio Ethical Fashion Summit. And thank you to the Rio Ethical Fashion Summit for hosting this conversation. Please follow, if you could share really quickly, please follow Yvonne and Liz on Instagram. Can you just say quickly or how we can follow and how we can connect with you so people can drop some cash with you guys?
So you can follow the Board of Fashion Ghana or Yvonne _Ntiamoah Instagram.
Okay, great. And Liz?
And then for me, please do not follow my personal Instagram, but you can follow our organization one, which is at PHEORISTRESENT, the or is present.
Okay. And if you guys didn't catch that, everybody that's following, we're going to make sure that it's out there so you can get in touch and support these two wonderful women, these Wonder Women. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rico Ethical Fashion. I wish we had more time I could speak to you, but I think, Yvonne, you're ready to go to sleep. I bet you're ready to
Yes. Let her go.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to meet you all.
Liz, safe travels. Safe travels.
Thank you.
On Friday.
Yeah. And I'll see you soon, Yvonne. Yeah.
Come and join my internet page.